Hello and welcome to the Advanced Podcast. I'm your host, Vikas Pota. Today, I'm really pleased to be joined by Alex Crossman. Alex is the headmaster of the London Academy of Excellence, currently the highest ranked sixth form provider in England, and a school widely recognized for delivering outstanding outcomes for students from all backgrounds. He is also the co-author of Great Expectations, Enabling Achievement for Disadvantaged Students, published in 2024, which speaks directly to many of the questions we're asking about equity, ambition, and what it truly takes for young people to succeed. Alongside leading a school, Alex dedicates his time to supporting other leaders. He works with organizations such as Ambition School Leadership and the New Schools Network, lectures at the UCL Institute of Education, and contributes to wider education conversations through his involvement with the World School Summit and other education boards. Teaching was always Alex's first calling, even though it was not his first career. Before moving into education, he worked at senior level in global investment banking, leading strategy, which gives him a distinctive perspective on leadership, performance, and systems. Alex grew up in one of the most deprived parts of Birmingham, and that experience continues to shape his commitment to widening opportunity and raising expectations for young people. Alex, it's great to have you with us. Welcome to the Advanced Podcast. Alex, welcome to the Advanced Podcast. You and I have known each other for quite some time, actually, even before your educational career. And I'm so proud of everything you've achieved. But more than anything else, I think when I tell people about the London Academy of Excellence, which you're the principal of, they get flabbergasted as to, wow, how the hell does he do it? And so it seems appropriate to have you on this podcast, which is around high performance. Why don't you start off by just introducing yourself and telling people about the listeners that we have about the London Academy of Excellence?
Well, Vic, thank you very much for that characteristically over-generous introduction. It's a pleasure to be here. Always a pleasure to talk to you, but a pleasure to talk to you in this context particularly. So let me talk a little bit about the LAE and what it is that we try to do and the track record. So the LAE is it's a sort of fairly unique social experiment, at least in a sort of UK context. So it's a school that was founded through a loose consortium of originally 6 independent schools, so fee-paying independent schools like Eton College, Brighton College, Caterham School, Highgate School. Those schools came together in the period after the London Olympics, so 2012, and the objective was very much to establish a high-performing school in the East End of London, which is an area characterized by a phenomenal, highly creative level of social and socioeconomic diversity, but also a very high level of disadvantage, both economic and educational, and really to provide a school for students from that part of London that could compete and could offer the range of opportunities that would more typically be associated with very high performing, but frankly also very expensive independent school on the UK model. And so the school set up in 2012, been running now for 13 years, I guess as a sort of an indicator of both the type of students and the type of success we've enjoyed. Whereas sort of schools at our phase of education, so post-16 education, with an academic curriculum, if you to look at the population of learners in the UK that attend such schools, it tends to be the case that somewhere between sort of 1 and on the high, maybe 4 or 5% of those learners will be disadvantaged in the terms we understand disadvantaged, so eligibility for free school meals or welfare payments in the UK. If you were to look at those schools at the sort of the top of the A-level attainment board, so those in the top 15 or 20, it tends to be at the lower end of that, so 1% below 1%. For us, that figure is about 45%. And we know that on the basis that eligibility criteria is about to change for essentially technical reasons, a fairer representation of the level of need in our community would be to say that about 75% of our students are in receipt of welfare of some sort, and a roughly similar percentage will have no experience in their immediate family of university education. So that's sort of the population. I mean, it hasn't changed that much over that timescale. Wasn't intended to, but I guess the school has been increasingly successful over that time frame. So consistently in the top sort of 4 or 5 schools nationally for A-level attainment in terms of raw grades, and although there are not there's not one measure that quite tells the same story. Similar sort of degree of success in terms of university admissions. So whether you're looking at any of the obvious measures, so Oxford, Cambridge, British medical schools, sort of Russell Group, Sutton 30, all of those very, very high by anyone's standards, let alone the sort of school that serves the kind of population that we serve.
I mean, the thing that you very modestly don't talk about actually is that you send, and I want our listeners to understand that you send more children to Oxford, so Oxford and Cambridge universities, than your partner schools like Eton College, which is a remarkable achievement given the socio-demographic as well as, the marketing of these grand schools that exist. The real question is like, how do you do it?
Well, I mean, I suppose a couple of things there. I mean, number one, we sometimes send more students to Oxford and Cambridge than some of our partner schools or other independent schools, but that is just one measure of success. So, I mean, our ambition is to be able to support and facilitate whatever level of ambition our students have, whatever their aspirations might be. In some ways, numerically, in some years, for example, medical schools are more important to us to our students' aspirations than Oxford or Cambridge or the combination of the two. But be that as it may, I mean, it's an incredibly high achieving sort of cohort of students, and yes, there's a certain degree of pride in our ability to facilitate that. How do we do it? I mean, I suppose it's not one thing, I think is the critical point to make. We're often approached by other schools elsewhere in the country, and I think sometimes what they're looking for is it this program? Is it this point in the timetable? Is it this set of resources that you can put in front of students that really makes the difference? And of course, all of those things exist, but they can't be seen in isolation. It's the totality of the experience that really unlocks the potential. And maybe just to sort of embroider that theme a little bit more, I think the really distinctive thing about the school, other than this combination of high academic attainment with high levels of disadvantage, is the holistic nature of the experience. So for a post-16 school in a mostly state-funded environment, there is sort of a model. There is a conventional model out there, which I'm sure underserved by characterizing as relatively narrow, something of a drop-in service. So students more accustomed to a kind of college model where they may come in for certain lessons and they're otherwise free to spend their time as they see fit. And there are probably a fairly limited range of co-curricular, extracurricular, supercurricular type opportunities. We're not like that at all. So students have a full school day throughout both of their years with us. That school day is longer than the typical school day. They will arrive by around 8 a.m., some of them much earlier. Some will leave occasionally some will leave at 4, but some may not leave until 6. They are studying typically 4 A-levels in year 12, but they also take a number of elective programs, which are school generated, but characterized by high degrees of academic rigor and challenge. And they're also all engaged in physical activity, so sports and other types of physical activity, other kinds of well-being, massive pastoral support. So it really is the holistic nature of the experience that drives the outcomes, drives the university progression, and combines all of those things with, of course, very high levels of student well-being and we hope human flourishing.
And so, you like you mentioned in your introduction, like you consistently, obviously rank at the top, and yet you take students from a very mixed backgrounds. What have you learned about the specific conditions that allow 16 to 18-year-olds to thrive at an elite academic level?
So I think it's, I would highlight 2 things. So the first is students like our students, they sort of need someone to believe in them in order that they can believe in themselves. So achievement at the highest levels is not normal for them. It just isn't, and they often, they lack a frame of reference that allows them to be confident in their own abilities. So what I mean by that is, if you have been in the, let's even say, as is the case for many of our students, you're the highest performing student in your school, but your school sort of stops at 16, and with the greatest respect to all of our sort of the schools that send the students, they don't all have national reputations. They won't all have a tradition of sending many students to sort of higher, more competitive universities. So if you're the student at the center of all of that, you just don't really know. What does that mean? Are you in a sense just the best student in your year group in that school, or are you someone who actually could be competing at the highest level anyway? There's just no way to know. So a big part of what we do in the early stages of year 12 is really invest in their sense of self-worth, really invest in sort of trying to validate themselves as scholars, as learners, as dynamic young people who can make a positive impact on society and on the world in time. And then trying to, once you've worked on that individually, really work on the power of the community. So I say at the beginning of every year and the end of every cohort's journey, right? The most powerful thing we can do is to assemble this extraordinary community of young people and to get them to work effectively together. So it's very important to me that the environment is supportive, challenging in the right way, competitive in the right way, but not overly pressured. So we don't want them to feel that they are being academically hothoused or that they are competing with each other. We want them to feel like they're competing with everybody who is not a student at the LA.
But then, schools like this are often have the reputation of, like you said, of being hothouses, or if I was to speak in terms of like polite language, I'd say, how, I suppose the question is, how should schools balance like this pursuit of academic excellence with the broader responsibility, I think, that exists of the formation of character, confidence, and moral judgment? Yeah. I'd love your take on that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that absolutely is. It's both the general stereotype, and it's definitely a stereotype that we encounter. So, people who aren't familiar with the school, but whom I speak to sort of socially or even professionally, I mean, I think their default assumption is you're an exam factory, right? You must be, because isn't that just how we get, bluntly, poorer kids into better universities? And obviously I would reject that entirely, but it's the received wisdom. Look, I mean, how do you balance those things? I think, again, it isn't any one thing. It is about the consistency of the messaging that you provide to students throughout, so that they understand that, the grades they're going to achieve are sometimes unfortunately necessary currency for progression, certainly into higher education and probably a little beyond that, sadly. But they're just not the things that will ultimately make them successful out there in what you might call the real world. It helps in that regard to have quite a lot of professional experience outside of schools. I know where those things will be relevant and where they won't, honestly. I mean, I sometimes tell students that there are lots and lots and lots of young people who have been academically high performing, graduated from very prestigious universities, but are professionally useless for the early stage of their career. And I know this because I was one of those people for an indecently long time. So I think it is about making them, it's about sensitizing them to the sorts of opportunities and the sorts of challenges they will face as young professionals, as young leaders, and making that a part of their day-to-day reality, so that they can see beyond the sort of the kind of short-term lure of I have to pass this test and get this grade in order to, or fill in this section in my personal statement in order that I can go to this particular university.
You've argued. I've been reading your Substack actually. You've argued that.
Great.
Yeah, that's right. The one reader. You've argued that teenagers that today aren't disengaged because they're lazy, but because the world is overwhelming them in ways they haven't adapted to. What would it like? What would it look like for schools to meet adolescents where they actually are?
I mean, it's a terrific question. I mean, in a sense, it's the pressing question, right? So maybe just to elaborate a little bit about the problem while I try and set a subroutine thinking on the solution. The challenges that teenagers in particular face these days, clearly, they are existential in nature. So I am, and respectfully, you are just about old enough to remember a period of time when the prospect of nuclear annihilation seemed very real as a young person. But it always felt, there was an element of contingency, right? It was out there. One couldn't dismiss it. Your parents or others couldn't entirely say there's nothing to worry about. But it didn't feel as though it was happening. We're now confronting challenges that are happening, right? I mean, climate change is a reality. It's happening. It's accelerating. Young people are acutely aware of that. They are acutely aware of social fragmentation and the challenges that brings. If they happen to be male, they are facing a real crisis of identity almost everywhere and almost independent of things like socioeconomic status. So, I mean, these are real challenges. And, frankly, the advent of sort of social media or other forms of communication technology has meant that these challenges, we simply can't, we can't immure young people, we can't protect them from awareness of these challenges in a way that perhaps we could have in a bygone, slightly more innocent age. So how do we train young people, or how do we equip them with the tools to meet those challenges? Very, very hard. I think it starts with understanding, right? So I think since we can't isolate them from those challenges, we have to educate them. We have to, more than anything, for me personally, it's about cultivating within young people a sense of agency, right? It's the lack of agency that leads to despondency. So if we're dealing with climate change, which is unavoidable, we need young people to feel that they can make a positive, proactive difference, not just in 10 years' time, or not just when they are running UN agencies, but right now. I mean, right now, how can they take initiative right now in order to make a difference in their local environment, in their local community? And how can they trace the path from that sort of potentially quite micro local initiative to the long-term initiative, the long-term impact that they could have on a societal challenge that is otherwise going to overwhelm them?
In one of your articles, actually, you focused on white working class underachievement and the growing disengagement of many pupils from schooling. And your main argument basically is that when you draw upon recent research, you argue that the issue is not lack of aspiration, but a lack of belief that education leads to real opportunity. One of the most striking findings you cite is that many white working class families do not see schooling as a route through which aspiration can be fulfilled. How do schools rebuild this belief when trust in the system has already been lost?
So again, I mean, it's a terrific question, and I have to say, look, there's really important research which is emerging now around sort of collation of this sort of evidence in those communities. But I have to say, I mean, I spent quite a lot of time in those communities personally, and like families at the center of this particular sort of political storm, they will tell you, right? It simply isn't true that they can't conceive of any particular ambition for their child other than tracing their own sort of life's journey, right? It just isn't that. In fact, very often they can be highly aspirational for their young people, even if that aspiration isn't always as well formed as it might be in communities where experience of higher education and professions is probably a little more common. But how can we reconnect that? I think it's about forging authentic connection with those families. Frankly, I think it would help if the education system, schooling system, were a little more honest about where we have done a poorer job reaching out to them. One of the things, if I were to be critical of my own profession, it's a little too easy, particularly in a schooling environment, to feel as though all of the systems, all of the processes, not just the intent behind them, are always morally irreproachable. Right? We're always doing the right thing. And if you're not responding, that's very much a you problem, not an us problem. I think we have to own it. I think maybe it's an us problem, right? Maybe we have not done a good job communicating the importance of education in anything other than a transactional way, or maybe we've not been sufficiently empathetic to families that have lost trust in the educational system, or perhaps didn't have it to begin with, right? Have we done enough there? I mean, the answer almost by definition has to be no, because if we'd done a better job, potentially the levels of disengagement we're seeing wouldn't exist in quite the same way.
Alex, I'm sorry to keep on fleeting between subjects, but I do think we should also, before the opportunity leaves us of this interview, talk about, you've been speaking a lot about AI, and the rush to adopt AI in education really has outpaced serious discussion about principles and responsibility. Do you want to say more about that?
I couldn't agree more. I would say, and I appreciate this is probably a very particular and probably prejudicial view, but it seems to me there are two discussions, right? We are simultaneously having two discussions. One is extremely tactical. Who marks this paper? Is it a human being or not? How do we create assessments for students which have integrity? How do we ensure that kids, frankly, are not cheating? What does that even mean? How do we lighten the teacher workload? All of those things, important, but fundamentally quite tactical. And then we're having a conversation which is of an existential nature about, how do human beings coexist with non-human intelligences, and what does it mean to be human in that context? And what we've so far failed to do, I think you might in some cases argue that we haven't really tried, is to connect those two conversations, right? We're just not there, right? We either have high statements of principle around how things like creativity are incredibly important, and creativity is a defining human value, or critical thinking is a defining human skill or defining human attribute. And of course, I would agree with those things, but it doesn't really translate yet into what happens within schools or in society more generally, in order that young people can continue to flourish throughout their childhood, their adolescence, and their adult lives, in a condition where society and the education system could look really radically different in 5 or 10 years' time.
And so, you've talked a little bit about, AI shouldn't steal the struggle from students. Say more about that.
So I guess where I'm coming from, and I did helpfully write this down before he committed his own thoughts to print, but I'm going to cite a much more luminary authority than myself. So Damon Acemoglu, is an economist at MIT, Nobel Prize winner, wrote an editorial recently in which he argued that essentially what we are in danger of surrendering is any sense of agency over the proliferation and use of technology. And I think that's exactly right. I think we're in danger of diverting ourselves into an intellectual cul-de-sac where mostly non-technologists try to convince one another that here are a range of things that AI simply can't do and will never do, very quickly eclipsed by AI then going on to do those things, and the conversation just moves on to an increasingly narrow sort of sliver of ground in which we feel we can be authentically human. I just think that simply is a waste of time, right? I think instead what we need to do is we need to decide what it is about the human experience that we value, And we just need to fight for that, right? We just need to accept that is going to be a struggle, but we think it is important. Now that could be any number of things. It could be creativity, could be critical thinking, it could be empathy. It could be the value of an interaction like this, though perhaps more in real life space than in a virtual space or through the intermediary of a screen. But we have to fight for those things. We have to make a conscious societal decision to fight for those things, which at a school level means that there are certain practices that we're going to retain, whether or not they could be substituted by AI. And I don't think that's AI skepticism. I do think we have a profound responsibility to teach young people to use AI responsibly and to develop AI strategies within a sort of principles-based framework. But I think we also, that framework needs to foreground the importance and value of the human experience.
Alex, there's a bit of an exclusive to our listeners over here, in that by the time this interview comes out, it'll become public knowledge that you are moving on from the London Academy of Excellence. Many congratulations on your next move. Do you want to say a little bit about your new setting?
So in some ways very different, and in some ways very similar. So I am moving on to be the principal and chief executive of St. George's British International School in Rome, Italy, which is a very, very special school that frankly has sort of lived in my imagination for some time, and will, now that I have been down and now that I've been appointed, has a very, very special place in my heart. So it's a school that was founded in the late 1950s. It serves principally, but not exclusively, an expatriate community in Rome. So well north of 100 nationalities represented in the student cohort, all through school, IB school, lots of room for personal development and growth, lots of things that I haven't done before, but fundamentally a school that is committed to cosmopolitanism, internationalism, to inclusion, very important to me, and also to excellence in all areas of school endeavor. So yeah, I'm incredibly excited, slightly overwhelmed that this has actually happened.
So Alex, the reason I mentioned this is that you've gone from being an investment banker in a first career. You've become through a route, you've become the school principal of the London Academy of Excellence. Now you're moving into the independent sector. This podcast is very much about driving high performance in schools. We just need high performance in schools is what my belief is. And so what are the lessons that you've learned, your top 3 lessons as to how someone, another school leader or another education leader listening to this interview, what are the 3 things that they could take away from your lesson, from your life and your learnings about how to drive high performance? Do you want to list those 3 things?
I would say high performance means different things to different people and in different contexts. So I think it's about I think you need absolute clarity about what high performance means to you and in your context, and ideally those things should resonate, right? There's not a great deal of point in seeking opportunities where you have a fundamental clash with the rest of the school community around those things. You need to be operating in an environment that is conducive for you to live your own values. So absolute clarity about what you mean by high performance, because there are a variety of equally legitimate ways we could define that, but it has to be something that you understand and own personally. I suppose secondly, Thomas Jefferson once memorably said that zealotry and support of patriotism is no vice. Well, I mean, I think there's an element of the zealot to the high-performing school leader, and I realize that may be slightly unsettling both to my existing and my future colleagues, but I do think it is true. I think you have to give yourself over to this mission entirely and with abandon in order to really deliver what you want for your students and all to provide the support that your colleagues will reasonably expect. So I think that sort of level of investment, personal investment, hugely important. And the other thing in terms of driving high performance, look, I mean, I think maybe it should go without saying, but sadly I don't think it can. I think you have to be fair in all times and in all things. I think there's a healthy element of social justice that needs to temper everything that we do and should run through everything that we do as educational leaders, because it's really very hard for people, whether those people happen to be adults with professional sounding job titles, or they're young people sort of at the early stage of their education, or on the launch pad to university. It's really very difficult, for those people to give all their all if they don't feel that they are in an environment or dealing with someone who is going to treat them fairly.
Alex, you talk about these three things. What are the things that you've got wrong?
Oh, almost everything. No, almost everything at one point or another. I suppose that's a different sort of leadership lesson. You're allowed to get things wrong, right? I actively encourage sort of school leaders and students, everyone else. You learn through getting things wrong very largely. It's much easier to learn through error than through success. People often don't understand success. They can often take the wrong lessons from success. Those lessons typically play to the ego rather than reflect the evidence base. Whereas you can generally learn an awful lot more from success. I suppose a representative cross-sampling of the things that I've got wrong. Well, as you mentioned, Vic, I was a career changer, so I did. So the thing that I got wrong was I probably imagined in the very early days of my teaching practice that I might be spontaneously good at it. I wasn't. I had to learn a lot of that. And I had to work very hard at it. I suppose the thing that I got right in that context was that I didn't pretend, right? I sort of owned the fact that it wasn't working, and I was prepared to learn from people who, because of the very odd way I entered the teaching profession, I was quite quickly nominally senior to people who were just much better in the classroom in most useful ways than I was. So I never tried to pretend, right? I never tried to pretend that I could sort of teach them how to be better classroom professionals. Quite the reverse. I invited their often deeply critical feedback because it allowed me to grow. So that's something I got wrong, but it's something I learned from. Other things that I got wrong. Well, I think there's a sort of misapprehensions. When I started my teaching practice, I suppose I was acutely sensitive, again, for personal reasons, to the vulnerabilities that are associated with poverty. And I learned very quickly that there are lots of vulnerabilities that affect young people that might be made worse than by poverty, but they're really not about poverty at all. So, people's lives are often more fragile than we would like to imagine, wherever they happen to sit on the income distribution. So as two very modest examples, but we really don't have time enough for me to list the many, many things that I've managed to get wrong over the last sort of 50 years.
Well, Alex, I want to say thank you for joining us on this episode of the Advanced Podcast. I know we've cancelled a few times, but we are here just pre-Christmas recording this. I learned a lot of things actually from what you said, and actually because we know each other, I can tell people of some stories as well in terms of your misdemeanors, but also your successes. But the thing that really strikes me about everything that you say and everything I know about you is your commitment to communicating your vision at every opportunity. So for people in your school, your community always understands the direction and purpose of the work. And secondly, what I also know about you is that you're scrupulously honest in your dealings with colleagues, and that's what actually leads to trust and a strong culture to be developed in the schools that you've run. And the third thing that I've always known about you is that you foster agency while discouraging autonomy. Give people ownership, but within clear and shared boundaries is how I say it. And when we spoke about the subject latterly in this podcast, you talked about three lessons of high performance, and they kind of track well with what I've just said, which are around being supremely clear as to what high performance means to you and in your context, which I think is very powerful for us to actually reflect on. The second is around, you talk about this obsession or zealotry. The thing is about making it your mission entirely, which I appreciate. In today's age, we have lots of things going on all the time, but the bigger picture, I think you're right. You have to be totally 100% in, more than try to be diverse in your interests and your focal areas. And the third thing, which I take a lot of inspiration from, and actually this applies to all educators to some degree, which is this sense of fairness. Like, we're in education. There is a social justice kind of theme to this anyway. But the point you make about fairness at all times, I think is a very powerful one in terms of to drive high performance. And I really appreciate that about everything that you've said. Thank you for joining this advanced podcast. And I want to listen to all our listeners, if you enjoyed this episode, please follow the podcast on your preferred platforms, download it, share it, and join us for the next one. Alex, thank you so much for this opportunity, and we wish you very well in your future career. I'm sure we'll be in touch anyway.
Vikas, thank you so much. And just to you've been far too generous in your compliments, but just to replace some of that, clearly the work you're doing here, the work you're doing with T4, the creation of a genuinely global community of educators, all of that is enormously supportive of the work that we all do in schools, and we all do deeply appreciate that.
And was that an invitation to Rome for the World School Summit? Did I
Absolutely.
hear?
Anytime the World School Summit wants to come to Rome, we would be delighted to have you.
Thank you so much, Alex.
Thank you.